Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe or hit the bell icon. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted and privileged to have a conversation with Florian Kemmerich. Florian, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Frits. Pleasure being here and looking forward to our conversation.
Hey. Florian is the managing partner of Bamboo Capital Partners and an impact investor. He has a passion around impact investment and effective personal development methodologies. Now, he's been involved in a number of healthcare programs around Central America and is the chair of YPO's Impact Networks Council, where he also founded the Planet Action Network. Hey, Florian, again, welcome to the program. Now, if I go online, I find a lot of information, podcasts, interviews you take to talk about impact investment, something we'll definitely cover today. But you also indicate you have a passion for effective personal development, but I cannot really find your views on that. And somehow I think they're very relevant and they are related. So just wondering, what are your views on effective personal development?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if I go back, and I think one of the problems of the root cause of our educational system is that we are the absent of our own education. In primary, secondary school, in high school, we are taught everything around us, but not really a little bit of a biology about us. We don't know what our vocations are. We do not discover ourselves. We do not really understand how our mind works, our heart works, our instinct works, and how to put that to place so that we take our own decisions. So after you're going through the normal program, you go through school, and after school you pick a profession. Actually, I wanted to become a stand-up comedian at its time, and study dramatic arts. And my father said, "Man, maybe you want to do something normal first, and then you do it." And of course, here you go. I decided to study business administration and marketing, international marketing, and that's when I went the path. So it goes really that I had then the dream to become, a director and then a managing director and marry, family, kids, the home, the typical dream everybody would have. And at the age of 30, I was there. And I asked my question why I'm not feeling fulfilled, because I basically realized my dream. But my dream was focusing on a fantasy, not on a path. And so one of these pieces in that quest, even before, I started to look at personal development, to understand myself better, and to try to find ways, to actually decide to make my own decisions for myself, not based on surroundings or recommendation or a job or a new job offer.
So you basically, yeah. So what I hear you say, you fulfilled somebody else's dream or society's dream rather than, okay, what do you want to get out of life?
Correct. And that's one of the parts when I learned about different, methodologies which are out there. MBTI is one, for example. Neuro-linguistic programming is another one. The Enneagram is a very good tool. Yeah, you have different tools there to look at, which help you that. But in that same way, basically, my learning was that I stumbled into the real life and had empirical learning rather than early on being prepared with, ways to look at things differently. And of course, that includes, if you look at impact investing, that you basically use your money when you buy a product or when you invest to help the people and help the planet. But you don't know because you start using and spending and having a dream, understanding you're not helping, you're actually harming humanity in the long run. And that is something where I believe it shouldn't be empirical. And this is actually where the question is a great one, because it relates the personal self-discovery and impact investing, basically doing something about, and it doesn't have to be impact investing, because I can decide where I spend my money on buying a product or investing money. And if this is aligned, basically, number one, you can focus yourself on doing a job which is based on your passion and your vocation and do that for a living. At the same time, you're actually making a difference in the world and you're helping a greater cause, which is not you, it is others.
Actually, I like the way that you start to immediately combine the personal development with impact investment. So you're describing what it has brought you. But are you able to share with us what your personal dream then is? So we've just concluded you're first living somebody else's dream, society's dream, but you found your personal dream. And is this something which is an epiphany? Is it something which grows upon you? So how do you get from being completely ignorant to understanding and having a very good understanding, this is why I'm here and what I want to do?
Great question, Fritz. So what I've learned is that there's a big difference between a fantasy and an intuition. But it's very difficult to differentiate because both are based on a desire.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm a hobby musician. If I want to be a rock star, that's a fantasy because it's a result focused. If I love to play music, whomever is in front of me, and if I enjoy it, it's great. It stimulates me, but it doesn't have to be. Then it's the path. So if you relate that to asking yourself, what makes you move? I actually discovered it myself, that a little bit maybe even going back to my dream of stand-up comedian. You communicate with your words, story, and things to make people happy. You know, if you look at some interviews, for example, Jim Carrey was giving why that he's doing what he does and how he ended up there, you see that he walked his path even though people told him not to do. And it's not about his success, it's about doing the path. And so therefore I discovered on my end that my communication skills to inspire others, to contage others, like in a business world, you would say my chief evangelists skills, where you look at a value proposition and you communicate that effectively, which inspires all stakeholders, not just the shareholders. So that is one part. And then relate that to my desire to support others, to inspire others, and to trigger change for the greater good. I didn't end up in the impact investing field because I come from finance. Because I'm just bringing one angle, but the very, very strong angle of impact investing is actually the theory of change. What do you want to trigger to change? So therefore you see that link I can talk about today. It wasn't clear for me 10 years ago because I didn't do impact investing. I actually bumped into it when I met my partner here on a football field, with our boys. And I learned about impact investing. But that's when I said, wow, because in the past I had some experiences out in the jungle, where I learned that helping just for you to feel better does not necessarily help. If you invest yourself, if you put yourself at risk, that's why my personal lemma is impact lives and share profits now, 5 years into impact investing. And that's where, for me, things have changed, because even though job is hard and fundraising is hard and the way where we deploy the money is very difficult, it's a hard work and probably I could earn more money elsewhere doing other things. But for me, to have the satisfaction that I'm actually in the area and the way I want to do. I'm in the communication, repositioning, value proposition, increased perceived value of my company, and where we drive our theories of change. We partner with the UN now, we partner with the World Bank now, and that also applies into our interaction between you, Fritz, and myself on driving impact also within organizations like, for example, YPO. So that draws back. I could have started that much earlier. I might not have to wait until the age of really, close to 50, with the learnings to then pivot. If I would have had a structural way early on to a self-discovery, and then also the support, from the people you look at and you admire, to actually dare to take the risk to walk the talk. I hope it's not so long, but this is a little bit where you see the nuances
Yeah.
of personal development inside out is triggered. It's
No,
not
I
put
got
on
that.
you.
Yeah.
And then you find what you're good at, what your passion is about. And you combine it, of course, now focusing on others, not you.
Got it. Before we move on to impact investment and your work there's one thing in your reply which made me a little bit curious. You mentioned a couple of personal development methodologies, all well-known and proven methodologies. Is there one which sticks out so which one of those methodologies would you recommend people to follow to invest time in?
That's a good question because I think there are different layers of depth of methodologies. And I had to learn myself because I wouldn't dare to go vulnerable. I wouldn't dare to go in areas where I'm uncomfortable. So you stay there and it's better not to be aware and you do your thing, and you are in the hamster wheel and you run and you do and your stuff. And when it becomes things more difficult, you just run faster. Yeah? Or suddenly you run in a different direction, but it's still the wheel. So that is something where I believe it depends on how, and actually your capability and willingness to go inside you. And this is not esoterical and spiritual. This is really just to understand what makes you trigger and where you are afraid, which areas and certain things which make you react, and where you are desires which make you act.
Okay, but can you then translate, I can follow this, but translate this to, well, if you are at this level, at the beginner's level, I would recommend this program. And then if you're way almost at the end of your journey to discover who you are, what you want to do, that's the program. So are you able to do that? Or is that, because that will be interesting to share with people.
Yes, I can share maybe on that side, and that's my personal experience. I bet there might be many more, much better, methodologies out there. But I would say, if you start first understanding, use something like Jung, Jung colors to understand a little where's affinity. After the Jung colors, you can go deeper in the same sense in doing probably MBTI. Myers-Briggs as another angle too, and go a little bit deeper. From there, you might go to the neuro-linguistic programming, which is really the way I communicate and what level and what words I choose based on, whether I'm auditive, visual, or kinesthetic, for example, which is a big piece of how I communicate. And then you might go into the Enneagram, where you really go into type of people, and it might put us sometimes a little bit in boxes, but you need a certain structure to understand and look at it, like a little bit psychoanalysis. You have to divide things and put in some categories, and there you go into 27 different, much more than the 3 and the 6 and the 9, 27. And thereafter, actually, which goes even wilder because it's on an energetic level, is actually human design. Yeah, it's another way where you have a map you look at and you start looking at relations of how you function versus, and you can map that, for example, with my wife or with my children, and then have a deeper understanding of the way we interact and communicate. But again, that might be for not necessary. It's just for me, I was extremely curious about it and I learned a lot.
Okay, no, but even just sharing that small list and programs and how you relate to one to the others could help a lot of people to who have to make that decision, want to make that decision to help. Okay, how I'm going to approach this. So that's very valuable. Thank you for sharing that. Now you just mentioned something. You had some experience in the jungle, and reading upon your background, you had quite a significant experience in the jungle. which brought you to impact investment. Can you briefly share what that was?
Yes, at its time, I was working for a large healthcare corporation. I was the managing director of the subsidiary in Mexico and the vice president in Latin America. And we were basically selling thousands of products into hospitals. So OR, ICU, it's really healthcare in a really large sense. And as you're an industry, what you do is also CSR, corporate social responsibility. So we were basically supporting and donating patient associations. And then actually decided to create a non-for-profit, medical education foundation, continuous medical education, with 600, doctors and nurses supporting in a larger net to train others. And as such was great. I had the pleasure to kick this off and get lots of huge support. And we started to operate. And we were donating also material from the industry, not the foundation, but via the foundation's work also, typically what big companies do, when they have the foundation aside, but basically to give back. Yeah, the old model, a little bit, if you are high up there, don't forget to send the elevator back down. Yeah. But learning how that elevator should look like, at its time I thought, you do good, you make money, and then you do good. Typical way. And we were supporting also a extramural surgery program with a truck basically going into the jungle, in indigenous areas to basically operate the local people which have no healthcare. There's no pharmacies, no physicians, there's no, not even social workers there. But it's really, so when you believe you're doing a good cause, treating people medically in the industry I was in, without asking anything for it and just doing good. And then once I got invited actually to join, and then I joined, to look at in 10 days, and it's an amazing feeling, but I recognized later on that when a child was operated on, that when the follow-up was made, not with a physical presence for myself, but just with a follow-up from a physician, I learned that a child had died. That child had died. I've seen there. And it's a little surgery, cleft lip, and an infection in the jungle, and there's no support. So it struck me because I said I was feeling so good, and I felt suddenly guilty because I was looking at me feeling good, not what is needed on the ground. If there would have been a pharmacy, if there would have been some support. So that stuck with me, where I said just going there, showing up and doing good and leaving doesn't help. And fast forward, then from the big corporate, I went on into late stage startups, put myself more at risk. We raised funds in very difficult times, 2008 and 9, for example, did a large funding round, really had to go very wild. I helped to turn around companies, not by restructuring, but by repositioning, which is, so value propositions and drive growth itself. And team motivation. And I actually used some of these methodologies in companies I worked for with my teams, get the egos down and interact. And then when I moved to Switzerland, I met on the football field my partner and I learned about impact investing. And then I said, wow, I didn't know that this exists. And this means capital as a force for good. So you do for profit and you measure and you invest in a theory of change and you measure that on the ground, because that related me back to my experience. If we would have done that earlier, that would have led to something else, which is healthcare access, not just coming there and leaving.
Got that. Because my question to you, as far as it being for you life-changing moment, that's the way how you describe hearing of this boy passing away. Suppose that boy did not pass away, or you did not hear about that. Would your life have been different? I.e., were you already on that journey you're now on, or was it really that significant?
I don't know. I would imagine, as I said, empirical situations.
Yeah.
You have an aha moment, and you change inside out. So that's actually then, at that time, when I decided to leave big corporate. It's not because I was against it, but we were doing things the ordinary way as usual, and that I started to put myself at risk. and to actually go in a path. So without being clearly conscious saying, oh, I can say that from the hindsight, helicopter view. But at this time, these crises, when you have these crises, they trigger change. Now, what I would love to have to learn that much earlier. Probably they would have been earlier and do what I do today. And I try to do today the best I can. But that's for me where I have the link of discovering myself and daring to do what I want to do. And this is not becoming Mahatma Gandhi. This is just certain things. We all have different dreams, different strengths, different talents. So it's not the typical way that somebody is maybe, let's say, arts and ending up being an engineer, or an engineer then being in sales, just because of something, someone telling you are good here, good that, you should do that, and you have that dream to succeed. So you're focused on a fantasy. You're not focused on the path. So always running behind in the wheel, running behind the carrot. And this, I think, it's a big pivot. But therefore, at least my learning is going inside, going vulnerable, understanding me, and then daring to do things. And I did it at a time when I had the nice golden handcuffs. Mm-hmm. I had a good job, an assistant, car, nice salary, nice bonus on top. Everything was good. Life was good financially. And I had a family, 5 kids, to feed. And I decided still to go and put myself really much more under pressure financially. But I started to go my path in steps. And so this is a little bit where I'm not saying here you discover yourself and you jump into the void. Yeah, but the earlier you know what you're up to, the less burden and responsibility you have. And gives you much more freedom. And you can see that a lot in the startups today. The mindset of Gen Z is very different compared to, to maybe our generation.
Okay. Now, that journey you're describing right now, was that a lonely journey in the sense that you do it by yourself, or were there people around you who help you lead the way?
Absolutely, there were. And leading the way also, that I was looking up to people. I had mentors, but when I looked at it longer, they said, that's not what I want to do. Nothing against the mentors, because they have great teachers, but it's just something saying, I figured this out. This is not the path I want to go. That's number one. Then that's more on the professional side. Then on the friendship side, when I put myself several times financially really under pressure in life, and that has collateral damage throughout the family and lifestyle and these things. And there, the support of my wife is extraordinary. I mean, because at the end, with the kids and the house and the family, and she's also a professional. She has been in the professional life, then stopped, focused on the kids, and comes back. And I'm fully supportive of her. But that's something where I really have to recognize that support, having there day in, day out, the good and the bad, is a key component for me, at least, because I'm very much into the couple. Yeah. And then the third one is friends. Friends I made over and I keep over time, where we sometimes do business actually, which is not that, business and friendship is friendship. And sometimes works out, sometimes it doesn't work out. But generally, usually, the friendship stays. And that, of course, then gives another way, because it's really about the network, about, inspiring people, doing something together, daring to do something. That is something where it makes a lot of fun, but also where there's a big gratitude to several people in my life who are still there in my life, supporting me.
Hey. Florian, so valuable to recognize that environment, which is going to help you, but actually it's helping everybody around us to get where they are. Now, I also want to briefly talk about Bamboo Capital Partners. Now, if people are curious about that, there are lots of interviews with you they can watch. So just to make people a little bit curious, Bamboo Capital Partners, it's meant to provide impact investment. First of all, define what's impact investment.
So impact investing means that you deploy capital focused on financial returns and scaling theories of change, basically resolving big issues of the world. So these theories of change are, you have different focuses geographically, you have different focuses on themes. You might do focus on climate change, on the mitigation or the alleviation. You might focus on women economic empowerment. Basically, you want to resolve things in terms of where equality is not there, in terms of wealth distribution, in terms of inclusion, in terms of diversity. So those are the typical topics for impact investing. Traditionally, you have a lot of aid and aid money doing things, which is a helping component. And that is now moving into impact investing. And then you have the financial world also waking up, with ESGs and SDGs, moving not into necessarily impact investing, but impact investing where you go and riskier and you scale it. Thereafter, you do ESG investing or sustainable investing. But the intention is really you deploy capital in different asset classes. So it's not an asset class, it's more an asset style. And it's private wealth, it's institutional, the different typical in financial investments you do, but to trigger a change on the ground and to scale it.
Got it. And scaling, that's what you have done very well. I'm reading on your website, you have impacted the lives of 184 million people. Now, that's a humongous number if you can actually do that. But can you describe what that looks like on a personal level?
So scaling is only possible if you include the inclusion. And so maybe for me, I joined later. I'm not a founder of Bamboo. That's my partner, Jean-Philippe, and he is a pioneer in the industry. And it's the second firm he's created, actually. And also a long path with a lot of stumblings in between. Very inspiring. But when we understood that we are in the fourth industrial revolution, and that means we have to rethink everything, how humanity lives, how mankind lives. And that is something where, of course, I come from a background from transactions. I come from a background from repositionings. I come from a background from strategic, how to increase perceived value. I saw this opportunity there also saying, because when Jean-Philippe started Bamboo, it's one fund and a second fund and a third fund. Typically asset manager, you raise, you deploy, and return. And that in very tough environments, last mile, low income population, private equity and private debt, Africa, Asia, Latin America, which is great from the themes, but tough to manage. And we basically thought through how can we scale that? And by having a fourth and fifth fund ourselves is not scaling it really. And that's when we started to pivot into a platform. So as we focus on inclusion, financial inclusion, energy inclusion, healthcare inclusion, education inclusion, also digital inclusion because of technology, we said, let's do the same on our work. And that's when we started to respond to RFPs or started to work with other organizations.
No, I got that, but let me rephrase the question. I'll give you an example of what it means on an individual level. I mean, if you impact 184 million people, does that mean I'm going to give you a job, food on the table, I'm going to give you an education? So how does that look like? When is somebody impacted to be included in that number?
Yes, okay, thank you for rephrasing that. So specifically to give you an example, you have 1.1 billion people today which do not have electricity at home. If you do not have electricity, You use kerosene, you do charcoal cooking, yeah, and you use candles. And the night is the night, it's dark.
Yes.
So that involves health, that involves security, but that also involves economic inclusion and doing, participating in the economy. So therefore, we have funds which focus on energy access. But it's not the old energy where you have an energy producing wiring and somebody paying for the energy. It's a distributed way. Thanks to technology, where we connect individual households with solar home units. They are remote controlled like Tesla, solar, the performance of the hardware. They are serviced by local retail stores. And the population creates a credit history because it's all financed. They pay $6, $10 per month for the service to have electricity, to charge their phone and have light, to add on appliances, all financed, a fridge, different things. And on top of that, internet access. And this is the one I want to say. So we measure how many people have energy today and don't have energy today. And then we measure what is their wealth increase. And then we measure what is the economic output and produce in terms of their productivity increasing. Then we measure what are the opportunities maybe for IoT. So it's thanks to technology, by the way, very granular and transformative. So we measure them by actually today, because that's out for some years, by SDG, by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And per SDG, so you have a big number like the 184 million. It should go up because we are about to release the 2020 impact report, which is a lot of work, all of that in feeding into. But there is two numbers basically, which is the lives impacted and jobs created, also female. But if you go in each theory of change, in each fund, there's a very granular way with an impact frame to measure. And that's why we say, and we have to be very humble and very careful, because it's not just us, but it's the money we bring and deploy which triggers the change.
Got it. Yeah. So, and you mentioned, we're moving in this fourth industrial wave. So I'm hearing you saying that, okay, you want to get as much people on board that train, that wave. You just mentioned also the SDGs, the 17 SDGs UN has. Now, that triggers me another series of questions I'd like to cover with you. Now, we only have 9 more years to go before we have to reach those SDGs. Is that enough time?
Okay. I don't think the SDGs as such will be reached just as a overall.
Yeah.
I believe we will have improved per SDG, in terms of not no poverty, but much less poverty. Not no hunger, but much less hunger. So therefore, to say in 2030 there is no hunger and there is no poverty is probably a little bit euphemistic, Yeah. So, but on the other side, I believe that that's the way to go. And the way is you have to have a clear intentionality and additionality of either your capital or your work and your focus. And that's, I think, the big positive around the SDGs.
Okay. Put in a bit of a historic context. Before we had the SDGs, the UN had the Millennium Goals. And there were about 8 Millennium Goals, and they were finished by 2015. They were agreed by all the world's countries and the leading development institutions, but were only focused on the developing countries only. After the Millennium Goals, we got the SDGs, and we got much more stakeholders involved. Mm-hmm. Now, and I agree with you, we're not going to be finished in 2030, but we'll have improved a lot of those SDGs by that time. do you feel that if you see that trend, Millennium Goals, SDGs, and no doubt there's going to be something which will then be follow the SDGs, would that also mean that the stakeholders involved should have a role to develop what we should be focusing on beyond the SDGs? And you mentioned you're part of YPO. For those of you who are not fully up to date on what YPO is, could you explain what YPO is, and should they play a role in developing the next program following the SDGs?
So the answer is clearly yes. The answer is actually all of us, anyone, everywhere, should do, and support a cause to support the planet and the people, because, these things might become very, very, very tough if we don't correct course. And of course, the pandemic has hardened the life for marginated people right now. Health, but also from a humanitarian point of view, from a financial point of view. So in that same sense, to answer your question, change is only triggered if you scale things and if you bring people together and organizations together to trigger that change. And to do that, we unfortunately see a lot of polarization in the fourth industrial revolution, of the goods and the bads, the yes and the no's, the right and the lefts. This does not help the cause, and governments pulling back. But organizations which are non-governmental can actually influence and sit down saying, hey guys, let's try to come up to a solution. So COP21, for example, is a part, a very crucial part to do things and to agree on that. In that sense, industry, the power of industry, of economy, plays a big role. So the Young Presidents Organization is actually a peer-to-peer, or a peer organization of CEOs and entrepreneurs in the world, 40,000, 50,000, growing. Mm-hmm. And the only goal we get together is basically to become better leaders through learning. But so far, maybe the leadership in the past was focused on better leaders by being more successful myself. There are great interactions where you go vulnerable, you learn about, so it has this personal development path in it to some extent, not methodologies, but to some extent, which is good. But really since 2018, we as YPOers and the organization said we need to become better leaders through impact, through driving change. And that's a learning, of course, how to do that. Yeah, because people say, okay, well, how do I impact? How can I do? If my company does X or Y, is one sector or the other, how do I do that? And there's a learning into. And that's where actually I believe it becomes very interesting, because the power of a large organization representing whatever, 25 million jobs, a massive, I think it's close to 10% of the global GDP basically in this organization through all the individuals. Sounds big, and in the past we were more focused on ourselves and our learning and did not go out. And this has changed really since, and this is also the interaction we have here with you, Fritz, is as an organization we said we need to use that power to help accelerating and trigger that change. The change is first in the organization. So it's not, so that all YPOers have learned how to go the path, how to trigger change for the greater good, but also that outside then with other organizations. So it's an exciting endeavor, and I spend quite a lot of time on doing that, which is not primarily my business focus, but at the end it has to do with it, because, as you align things of driving impact, it's basically additional to what I do with my company and my partners, and then beyond.
Right. That's fascinating. I really enjoyed listening to your answers to your discussions, Florian. The way I remember, I'm going to remember this interview, you are absolutely a storyteller with a vision on how you can help change this world. One final question for me. How do you want the world to remember you?
That's a good question. Probably as someone who's done his part for the greater good of planet and people.
I'd say enough said. Hey, I'm certain that's the way you're going to be remembered. And Florian, I thank you so much for this interview and spending time with the brand called you.
Thank you, Fritz. It was a great conversation, and I loved your questions, which were not straightforward, and I had really think through. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.